right, we're going to create 4 landscape composition sketches. So these are going to turn into paintings. So you want to take your time to create great compositions. Now, I'm using an 11 by 14 canvas for mine. So the math isn't exactly for how to create the ratio to get these composition thumbnail rectangles, but it's kind of almost the same as if you do an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, which is just like printer paper folded in fours. So that's good enough to get, the ratio to make the 11 by 14 canvas smaller and get a close enough ratio to work out your composition. So first I'll be working on this. I'm gonna use 2 different photos, and you can use 4 different photos or you can use all of the same photo. What you want to do is pick a photo that has background, middle ground, and foreground so that you can see at least 3 different levels of distance so you can create that atmospheric perspective where things in the background are going to be less detailed, less saturated, and so you can change that color and detail as you go into the background. You don't have to do just nature landscape. You could choose something that has buildings or a cityscape, but again, if you use a cityscape, it should have that distance. So I'm really just focusing on the outlines of the big shapes and kind of blocking in those big kind of chunks of shape. So there's the background will be those mountains. Then there's a middle ground where there's just like field. And then the foreground is going to be these trees in the kind of framing the composition. So it's good to have stuff in the foreground that has a lot of detail so that you can really show that atmospheric perspective where you have a lot of detail in the foreground and it gets less detailed. Now take time to try like cropping and using different angles. You want to choose a photo. If you're using a photo, you can of course do this in person, but that can be hard. So most people I think would take photos, and I usually work from photos. You want to choose a photo of a place that you've been to. You need to understand the 3-dimensional space of this place in real life, because in the photo a lot is lost. So in a photo the shadows are really flattened, and it's a 2-dimensional image of a real place in 3 dimensions. So it's best if you really know this place and have been there and have taken the photo yourself. Also, when you take photos, if you take a lot of them on your phone or if you have a camera, you can adjust the composition in real time when you're there. And I always take a bunch of different compositions so that when I go to draw and paint, I already have the composition worked out. Okay, now I'm going to work on a second photo and 2 different kind of croppings of that to see what's going to work best. This composition sketching is really where you're working out what's going to make sense for your painting, what kind of painting you want to do. It's where you work out the details. You can do, as many sketches as you want, and you can get detailed in the drawings if you want to, but at least, do this kind of simple outline blocking out to make sure you're going to get that atmospheric perspective and you're going to get, the background, middle ground, and foreground. And for this, some of these trees, like that tree in the curve I drew, is really important because it's setting up the different levels of distance. So, when you're doing these composition sketches, you're really studying the space, you're studying the composition, and you're working out a lot. Here's the background with the mountain in the background. Then there's a middle ground, there's a bridge here. And then the foreground is again some trees. This like framing technique in composition can help if you have trees on either side or buildings, can really help draw your eye into a composition. And of course, the road going back into perspective is helpful. So take your time. If you can always make lots of mistakes, you can erase. And this is where, you're you're making those mistakes, you're figuring stuff out, you're working it out through drawing. If you are doing something like this road or something with structures in it like buildings, definitely take a look in our online classroom at some linear perspective. I want everybody to be working with atmospheric perspective, but if you have any kind of human-made structures that are in perspective like this road is, definitely take a look at the linear perspective information, because that will help you get that all worked out. And if you take drawing, it always obviously helps with painting too. So take your time and figure out what composition you want to work on for your painting, for your landscape painting. And again, make sure there's atmospheric perspective in there and there's the levels of distance. We're going to be blocking in these, different levels of distance with paint, the background, the middle ground, and the foreground. So with your drawing, you're kind of outlining what we will be blocking in with paint. So you want to have enough distance going back into the background to show that atmospheric perspective, the change in color and detail. All right, have fun with it.